on page 19.
So well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted. Perfectly enlightened and blessed one, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. By him, I bow to the Dhamma. I bow to the Sangha. Now let's pay preliminary homage to the Buddha. Homage, noble and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble and perfectly enlightened one. Now let's chant the recollection. Spread as follows. He, the Blessed One, is indeed the Pure One, the perfectly enlightened One. He is impeccable in conduct and understanding. Those who wish to be trained. He is teacher of gods and humans. He is awake and holy. Worthy one, endowed with such excellent qualities, who speaks and the wise like the sun, awakening the lotus. I bow my head to that peaceful chief of conquerors, the Buddha, who is the safe, secure refuge of all beings. As the first object of recollection, Buddha is my Lord and guide. The Buddha is sorrow's destroyer, who bestows blessings on me. To the Buddha I dedicate this body and life, and in devotion I will. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. By the utterance of this truth, may I grow in the Master's way. By my devotion to the Buddha and the blessing of this practice, by its power, may all obstacles be overcome. Now let's chant the recollection of the Dhamma. The Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One, apparent here and now, experienced individually by the wise. Now let's chant the supreme praise of the Dhamma. It is excellent because it is well expounded, and it can be divided into paths into the illusion. I revere the excellent teaching, that which removes darkness, the Dhamma. I venerate it with bowed head. I am indeed the Dhamma's servant. The Dhamma devotion I will walk this excellent way of truth. For me there is no other refuge. The Dhamma is my excellent. By my devotion to the Dhamma and the blessing of this practice, by its power, may all obstacles. Now let us chant the recollection of the Sangha. They are the blessed ones. Insightfully, those who practice with integrity, that is the four pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings. These are the blessed ones' disciples. Such ones are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of rise in the world. Now let us chant the supreme praise of the Sangha. Born of the Dhamma, that Sangha which has practiced well, the field by excellent morality and virtue, I revere that assembly of noble. Your refuge of all beings, as the third object of recollection, I venerate it with bowed head. I am indeed the Sangha's servant. The Sangha is my Lord and guide. The Sangha I dedicate this body and life. There is no other. May I grow in the Master's way. By its power, may all obstacles be overcome.
There's also a few dedications I forgot to mention this evening. This is for Chongsu, Thwaites Mansoor, and then a dedication for Samira Mohammed Al-Musa, who is very ill. So we'll have a 5-minute bio break and we'll come back for the talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Just online Thanksgiving retreat. And before I get into it, just in case I forget to mention this at the end, a few announcements about the closing day, to check the schedule. Also, in the morning, the retreat announcement page will have closing information, and I'll mention this again at the end. Yeah, what's coming? And sometimes, I was talking the other night about gratitude for all the causes and conditions that made a place like Abhayagiri come about, and sometimes in the nervousness of giving a talk, you forget to. I was talking about Longpo Pasano and Longpo Amaro, founders of Abhayagiri, but also I think we could safely include Debbie as a founder of Abhayagiri as well, and having been part of the original Sanghapala board at Mark Lieberman's place, so it's part of the legend of how this place got started. And Daniel Barnes and all of our old-time friends, and just thanking, getting this to work with YouTube live stream, and it's just definitely a team effort, a full-on team effort to get this thing. Something is going to be like until you actually do it. You can have ideas about things, like about what an online retreat might mean, but was willing to try it. And a few reflections coming up today in my mind is kind of like, yeah, it's so different being together in person, and yet there's this possibility of outreach to a worldwide audience, and even people across the country. Like normally somebody in Ohio or on the East Coast wouldn't be able to just come out on Thanksgiving and do a residential retreat, and so it's really kept more to people who are closer by geographically. Very much felt like I've been meditating with everybody, and the fact that you've all been committing to the retreat from your homes, and so this is kind of profound for me to think about. Like, actually, there's all the conveniences of being at home. You can have food there. You can do your laundry. It's not like a residential retreat where you have to wait to get home to do your laundry. You're already at home. So there's these sense of wow, you can actually practice at home. It actually is possible. And I was extra impressed today looking at the group and the Q&A session and seeing that where they were, and then not only that, but then staying for the sit, meaning you were doing for those of you in the international community, you were actually doing an all-night sit. For us, it's the afternoon, but for practice, that level of energy and commitment is not only impressive, but that's what it takes. That's what we have to do. So a monastic retreat, a monastic residential retreat, a monastic online retreat, it's very much about
not just about meditation, but it's about what do we have to do to practice? How do we create a Dhamma life for ourselves? Not just a meditation practice, but an integrated practice, and how. And really, we don't even have to consider ourselves Buddhist. It's like in the time of the Buddha, there was these different castes, and they still exist now. They say they did away with the castes. Kshatriya, noble warriors, the Vesas, like the merchant class, and the Suddas, the laborers, and then say below that, the Chandalas, the scavengers. The emphasis of the Buddha's teaching is that it really flew in the face of Brahmanism at the time, so anybody from any caste could ordain, and then the Buddha said, well, you aren't defined by your caste. Virtuous, they can expect good results. If they're unvirtuous, they can expect bad results. If a Kshatriya is virtuous, they can expect good results. If they're unvirtuous, they can expect bad results. If a Sudda is so if either of those, the same thing. If they're virtuous, they can expect good results. If they're unvirtuous, they can expect bad results. And that was radical at the time of the Buddha. It was seen that the Brahmins were born of Brahma's mouth, and the lower castes were born of, say, lower parts of Brahma's body. So it was radical then for the Buddha to say, yeah, if you say keep the 5 precepts, you can expect things will get better, wholesome results. If you don't have precepts, if you don't lead a virtuous life, you can expect that it's not for sure. So it's like seeing people are people, the heart is the heart. And this is like illustrated by the story of when a lot of like Ananda, Anuruddha, Devadatta was among them. And so there's a number of them who have decided to go forth. And Upali the barber, he was of a lower caste, and he was with them. So there was these warriors. They go out together with the thought that we'll bring the barber with us so we can give all of our ornaments and that we're wearing and our jewels that we have, we can just give it to him, and we'll go and ordain. And so they go out, and then Upali the barber, he gets given all of their ornaments and their jewels, and then he thinks, oh, what am I doing? And then he decides to ordain with them, and they say, well, if you ordain with us, you should be senior to us to extra help us to let go of our caste. And so that sense that in becoming samanas, in becoming religious seekers, then they're no religions. If they say, if a Christian leads a virtuous life with integrity, they can expect good results. If not, they can expect bad results, and you could extend that. If a Democrat leads a virtuous, life, keeps precepts, doesn't doesn't commit sexual misconduct, doesn't use wrong speech, and so on. They can defining somebody based on, say, their political. He's got this different level of sila samadhi panya, and so these conventions, these external designations, are almost meaningless in terms of defining someone. So anyone who takes on the robes, whether we're however devout, one epithet for the robes, one thing they call the robes, is the banner of the arahants, or the banner of the enlightened ones. And so we messenger. One of the yogis on the retreat right now, it's quite wonderful. And just being reminded, oh yeah, that's one of my purposes as a bhikkhu, as a religious seeker, is to be a heavenly messenger. And so thinking about, to talk a little bit about that, and I'm reminded of the sutta where the Buddha, it talks about his process of deciding suttas. And so in the heart of Prince Siddhartha Gautama, as he was going through this process of deciding to leave the home life. And so, as the legend has it, he would, from time to time, go hang out in these beautiful parks and groves that surrounded the region. And actually, I was in a previous talk talking about Kapilavatthu, and it's modern day Nepal, but used to be India. It would have been the kingdom of, or the region of Kosala. With his harem, with his entourage, and go hang out and have a picnic, or whatever princes did at that time. And so he goes to go, and on the way, then and just to back up a little bit, the prince's father, King Suddhodana, he wants to shelter the prince from any surrounded by luxury and the fineries of a princely life. And so, but from time to time he is allowed to go out, and he goes out to this pleasure grove, and it just so happens that on the way they see an old person. So it's like, well, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with that person? And then his charioteer, Channa, says, well, that's an old person. That's what happens. People just get old, and it'll happen to you as well. The prince is kind of like, that's as he was reflecting on old age in that way, then any intoxication connected with his own youth faded completely from his mind. So the intoxication with youth faded away. He sees a sick person, someone who's gravely ill in India. He says, well, what's wrong with him. Sometimes there's problems with the body and people just fall ill, and sometimes it's really severe, sometimes they die from their illness. And so he said, well, gosh, that could happen to me, and that's unfortunate. And at that moment, so first the intoxication with youth faded from his mind, and then the intoxication with health faded from his mind. And so at a future time after that, then they're going to the pleasure grove again. The prince you can imagine he's in a pensive mood at this point. And he says, well, what's wrong with him? And Channa says, well, that's a dead person. They've died. And so the prince is kind of thinking about this, and then it's said that the intoxication with life faded completely from his mind. And so, and those three intoxications having faded from his mind, one gets the sense from reading the suttas, he's quite troubled at this point. And he's not really enjoying his principle. And so, but maybe there's some hope. Go and have another picnic at the pleasure grove. Let's go there again. Maybe things will get better. And then, but he's still kind of thinking of like these three intoxications have faded away. I'm not really taking enjoyment in these things now, which is old age, and the second heavenly messenger, which is the sickness, the third heavenly messenger, which is death. And they're called Devaduta, they're called heavenly messengers because they're reminders, they're heavenly reminders. Like, don't forget that this is what's happening to everybody without exception. And there's no exceptions to this. And he's sitting in meditation, and this was a tradition at the time of the Buddha. There was the tradition of the samana, those who leave home and seek peace, seek the deathless, and the prince passing this samana, and he's like, well, what's that? That's kind of interesting. And Channa, his charioteer, tells him, well, that's a samana. That's a religious seeker. So people who peace, they seek the deathless. And the prince says, well, that's good. And so that's the fourth heavenly messenger, is the samana. And I see that as like the samana is the response to sickness, death. How do I respond to this? And the samana is the response. And so I see that as like the practice, the Dhamma practice is the response to those things. So he decides to leave, and the rest is history. But it's worth thinking about those different intoxications, the intoxication with youth, the intoxication with health, the intoxication with life, and how they affect us, and how we take refuge in the youth. I mean, I can remember, I guess I'm still kind of young, I'm 40, but I can remember being 20. So then if we don't contemplate it, it disappears before we realize it. Or like health. Just like knowing people who were healthy. Meal dedication today, our dear friend Bart Grzalski, I was quite sad to hear that he died of COVID, and just this is happening for a lot of health, and this is so if we take refuge in health, then it disappears before we know it, or we might even have a sense that it'll disappear, but then we try to do everything we possibly can to keep it. So we can't fend off these things. We do what we can. It doesn't mean we just make ourselves unhealthy or sit back and wait to get sick, but we do what we can. It doesn't mean we don't do Chi Gong. But just knowing that it's going to end, it's going to disappear at some point. Life, knowing that life is going to end, life is going to disappear at some point. So there's this incredible sobriety connected with the practice. It's not just the sobriety of keeping the fifth of the 5 precepts, not drinking. It's the sobriety of mental balance, mental clarity, taking refuge in knowing awareness, truth, virtue. Those are the 3, what we call the internal refuges. If we talk about Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha as external refuges, that's one way of talking about them. The historical Buddha, the teaching that he gave, and the Sangha, the community. Those are the external refuges, but then the internal version of those 3 refuges is knowing, truth, and virtue. Those of you who perhaps haven't taken a monastic retreat yet might, we've been talking about different characters sometimes in the life of the Buddha, and different great monks, great practitioners. It's also worth mentioning that but there's also great laymen, laywomen featured, and there was also great disciples who were laymen and laywomen. So this is very important as well. I like to tell the story of Anathapindika, one of the great male lay followers of the Buddha. And he was a big, and he had a buddy of his who was one day preparing this gigantic feast. He was putting up pavilions and preparing parasols and sunshades and preparing this huge area for something. And Anathapindika, he goes up to him and he says, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you preparing for? Are you going to have a big wedding or something?" And he says, "No." And then Anathapindika says, "Are you preparing to receive?" Anathapindika says, "Well, what are you doing? How could you make such a big, it looks like this is like a really big deal, what you're preparing here." And he says, "Well, I've invited the Buddha and his disciples to come and have a meal. I've invited them for a meal offering. They're in the Buddha is in the area. He's come to Savatthi." And then Anathapindika says, "Did you say Buddha?" And the friend says, "Yes, I said Buddha." "Did you say Buddha?" "Yes, I said Buddha." "Did you say Buddha?" "Yes, I said Buddha." He says 3 times. And then he's like, effect on Anathapindika. And he says, okay, now I want to invite him for a meal. So, but he has to wait till the first invite is over. He can invite him the next day. But so he goes to this big meal offering and then says, I would like to invite you for the next day at my place for the meal. And so he decides the story wrong. He doesn't meet the Buddha at that big offering, but he decides he's going to go to the monastery and meet the Buddha. So that night, Anathapindika, he's not able to sleep. He keeps waking up thinking it's morning because he's so excited to go meet the Buddha for the first time. And then just before dawn, he's walking to where he hears the Buddha is, staying in a grove nearby. And as he's getting close to where the Buddha is, we don't know why, but suddenly he's overtaken with fear and dread, and he stops, and he's like, I can't go forward. Like, he has doubt. Doubt comes up in his mind, and then there's some sort of protector, deva, that is connected with him that and says, greater than kingship, greater than lordship over the whole world, worth more than kingship, that gives him, then his fear disappears and he's able to keep moving forward. And then he sees the Buddha doing walking meditation, and it's in the early morning mist. And the Buddha is doing walking meditation, and the Buddha says, come, Sujata. So Sujata is Anathapindika's family name, and then Anathapindika thinks he knows my family name, and he goes and pays respects. Never don't sleep well. And then they have this Dhamma conversation, and Anathapindika reaches stream entry through that initial conversation, and then that's when he initially makes this meal invite to the Buddha. After that, there's a prince in this area, in Savatthi, Prince Jeta. And Anathapindika gets this idea. He wants to offer land, he wants to offer a monastery for the Buddha and his disciples, for the Sangha. And he knows that Prince Jeta has this, says, I want to purchase this land from you. And this is this particular prince's pleasure park. So it's like very important to him and very special. And so it's like, well, no way. And then Anathapindika says, well, how much do you want? And then Prince Jeta says, thinking. So Anathapindika says, okay. And he starts having a train of carts with gold coins. His entire fortune, essentially. His entire fortune, he's got trains of carts with gold coins, and he has workers and servants putting from afar, and hey, this is kind of unusual. And as the story goes, Anathapindika runs out of money, and he's a millionaire, but he runs out of money, and the grove is not completely covered yet. There's still, like, say 1 acre or something that's not covered. The whole grove, I don't have that final acre of gold coins. I've run out of money. And Prince Jeta says, enough. It's yours. Like, this is very impressive. Indika's Park, where so many of the suttas are based, and so that sense of possible as a layperson, and it's not that people have to like offer millions of dollars to the Sangha to get the same benefits Anathapindika had, but it's there was also and she was became a big patron of the Sangha, and there's a story about her where and says like 20 children, and each of those 20 children has 20 children. And so she comes with this, one of her grandchildren has died, and she's mourning the death of this. Well, you have so many grandchildren that when are you not going to be mourning the death of a loved one? And it's known as the palace of Migara's mother, also the many suttas taking place there. So Visakha of these famous locations in the suttas as well. And there was other famous lay stage of awakening, Anagami. They would, it's quite interesting to see, and wore white, so like the Anagarikas here. I'm also coming back to some of the themes that came up during the retreat. Body. There's also a number of themes that Ajahn brought up in his talk. He mentioned like how to live in the world in terms of a term he kind of came up with, unentangled participation. And I thought I was quite taken by that. Truths. One term that caught me because he was talking about the third noble truth, the cessation of dukkha, and the term analayo actually struck me in that talk that he gave. Wrap, and the hunter being able to carry it away, and analayo meaning nothing sticks, sometimes is translated as not having anything, but somehow in the moment and all of these things we can keep revisiting them. Since the beginning of the retreat, it feels like this has been kind of a long retreat, and so since the beginning of the retreat there's been a number of these themes that we've picked up. Thankfulness and appreciation, recollecting the generosity that's made this place, this retreat, this life, this holy life possible. Lots of questions, the Q&As, how to focus on the breath, how to feel the breath, how to be mindful of feeling. The word that came to mind for the question, and it was kind of good to see. It's kind of like comes back to being a monastic or being a walk from here to Washington State and living off of remember having these interactions with people where it was like, and so just that question, that's good. That's very good. That's already like makes me feel really good to hear somebody say that. These teachings, and just I'd like to just put in a plug for keep going with the practice. Try to develop a daily practice. Not too little that you don't really get the benefit. That's coming back to like our international crew doing their all-night sit in order to be in our afternoon sit. You know, that sense of ardency is so important. Through the suttas, diving into the suttas, making a study of the suttas, and able to pay respects to Lungpor Ban in Thailand. He was giving a talk to some lay people, and he was actually saying, if you really want Dhamma, you have to think a lot. And then he said it again. He said, if you want Dhamma, you've got to think a lot. And then he said, you have to be thinking about Dhamma all the time. You have to take this and consider what I've said. It might be right, it might be wrong. Don't really have to take it. So yeah, thank you for participating. And this is the book, the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the whole premise of that book is, you know, when I think of quality, quality is like a sense of integrity, a sense of it works well, it's clean, it fits together. And if only I could broadcast this to the whole world, but also recognizing like it's not that many people who are going to want this kind of a teaching. And when we go for quality, then as individuals, the Buddha, the first people he taught was 5 people. He didn't seek out a big crowd. He was thinking, who's going to understand this teaching? And he walked 5 bhikkhus. And you would have thought, well, he's the Buddha, he's the enlightened one. Wouldn't he, just automatically teach the whole world? But the reflection being, do you want to wake up? Then that's where we put our energy. That's where we put our focus. So quite interesting, quite fascinating that this online retreat has worked out, and I truly wish everybody well. And far away, you could have just turned the screen off and gone into the other room or something. But you've attended, you've committed, and this is I can say sadhu to this. So I'll leave that. Can't have too many. To close this evening, we'll do the verses on the last instruction.
Annamayang Patima Yami Wo. Now bhikkhus I declare to you, Vaya Dhamma Sankara changes the nature of conditioned things. Appamadena sampadetati, perfect yourselves, not being Tathagata's final words.
Day. There will be, so closing announcements are at 8 a.m. And then at 8, and some more reflections, and then that'll close the retreat, and there will be an opportunity afterwards also to perhaps talk with each of the teachers on the retreat in breakout rooms. That'll be